Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Byron Tomingas, his life and his music from Jackson Hole. Next on Wyoming Chronicle. Byron Tomingas, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Let's start at the beginning. Why the guitar? Why music? And why Jackson Hole?
Why the guitar? It's an instrument you get to hold. That's pretty special. You know, a piano, you're like this, but you get to hold an instrument. That's something. So it could have been violin. I think the reason that it wasn't is because I had heard that most of the time everybody runs when you screech, scrock, and yes, I saw at a violin something terrible. So guitar, it's one that you can carry by yourself. You can be by yourself, play the whole orchestra, bass lines, top lines, chords, all at the same time.
Do you remember your first guitar?
I do. You want to see it?
We'll have to get it for us. It's back
right
there. Okay, yeah. And so how did that come into your life? You were living here in Jackson Hole as a young boy.
Yeah.
How did music grab you?
Well, you know, the whole family was musical. So, you know, I had an advantage right away. You could probably even say it goes back to my grandmother, Tomingas. She was an Estonian immigrant with her husband, who was also an Estonian immigrant. And they settled in Gillette, Wyoming, and had, you know, their children. And she had this pedal organ. She had been raised in St. Petersburg, Russia, and so she played the pump pedal organ. You'd pump it and then you could play.
All through air.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I can just imagine her out on the lonely plains of Wyoming, you know, in this little farmhouse, and you could hear Dark Eyes and songs like that coming out of this little farmhouse. So the children all grew up with it. So they grew up doing, the four brothers had a barn dance band together, and they did, they had fiddle and banjo and mandolin, guitar, and they'd all swap instruments. And this is probably one of the things that got me most interested in doing music, the doing of it, not listening to it, but the doing of it. And that was, the brothers were so quiet and so conservative and very typical of Estonian and of immigrants, you know, very, very, you know, reserved. Mm-hmm. And they would pick up the instruments, they'd laugh, and, oh, let's shoot another tune. You know? And it just, they came alive. It was wonderful to see this joy of just doing it, making the sound.
So how old were you then?
Oh, those memories are 3 years old, 4 years old.
Really young.
My memory goes back to the end of my first year.
Wow.
So I have vivid scenes throughout that era.
So what type of music were you playing as a young child?
Well, I think the first thing I played was I had a plastic ukulele that had one of those cranks on it and a little rubber spindle thing that would bong, 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 bong. And so I would play it backwards as fast as I could go. I have no idea what song it was anymore.
Sure. You have a brother?
I have an older brother, Henry. He's the one who actually brought music here and brought the guitar into the house. There's a painting there by Tucker Smith of a guitarist. When my brother went to the University of Wyoming, he had played guitar as a kid with his brother and had won contests and things, and they'd had a pretty good time, but then, you know, he'd stopped playing and got busy with doing all the things that a young kid does here in Jackson Hole, where, you know, there's hawks to raise and wildlife to go chase after, and anyway, so he went to the University of Wyoming, first of the family to go to college, and he roomed with Tucker Smith. Tucker Smith became an artist, and he But Tucker, to pay his way, was playing guitar. So it got my brother interested in playing guitar again. So he came home and he showed me, hey, this is really fun. You know, you can do Scotch and soda. And anyway, he said, this is fun. You should try it. And to be honest, he told me later that he was actually kind of worried about me because I didn't seem to have an interest in anything. I was kind of...
You're in your teens at the time then.
Right. When I was a child, the songs that had been really important, my mom had a recording of Edith Piaf, and loved the way that song accelerated and put it together. And then the other song that I can remember from about 3 or 4 years old, she also had a recording. These are the old plastic, LPs. She had a recording of Brahms' Hungarian Dance No. 5. And, I love that thing. I mean, it's funny to be at that age and be so moved and touched, and it took a hold, and I liked it. I wanted to do that. And it's funny, I didn't learn that song until until actually about 5 years ago.
The radio also influenced you when you were young.
Well, sort of. The radio, this town was just 1,000 people when I was growing up here. The mountains made it so isolated. The winters made it so isolated. When I was born, some of those people who first ever spent a winter in Jackson, Indians never spent the winters here. They hardly ever spent summers here because you could get caught in a storm in the middle of the summer and you would possibly perish. So, they stayed out of the valley. So the only ones who had first stayed, their children that they brought with them, they were still alive when I was born. This community is that young. And it was so isolated. There was the river, and there was Teton Pass. People would the groceries would come over to Fred's Market in Wilson, where it used to be, and you had to get across the river somehow to get your groceries if you were on this side of the river. And then later they started taking that, going through Slide Lake up to DuBois. And so then there became a passage that way. It became a problem because that's all bentonite, it all slides, and so it kept plugging up the road. So they finally made Togety Pass. And so this isolation, so the radio, you couldn't get much in the way of radio waves. And so I grew up mostly, the only information you had was what somebody knew in this town of 1,000 people. And
you write about information starvation, actually.
Yeah, information starvation. And here we are now living in the age of information saturation. Just completely, how do you filter all that stuff out? It's an interesting thing to take a career and be so starved for information and then suddenly so flooded with it. And you wonder how it would have affected your career, because in some cases it can depress a person. If you see somebody doing things that you wish you were doing, it can do either thing. It can either inspire you or it can depress you.
Spoken from a man who is technologically well-versed, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to the radio. So you would search the airwaves at night.
Right. So the only radio station we could get was KOMA radio in Oklahoma City for the style of music that my generation wanted here, which was rock and roll. And we, at 8 o'clock at night, they would boost their wattage to 50,000 watts. We could pick it up until midnight, and then they reduced it. So it was terrible at midnight because I'd be laying in bed trying to listen to it, and it would get scratchier and scratchier, the funny adage about sleeping with your guitar, I actually did. And, I'd be listening to KOMA and trying to learn the songs. I remember one night they played, and I learned the song. I jumped up, I got the whole song before the song ended. I had it down, okay, and went to bed and woke up the next day and I forgot it. I couldn't remember how it went.
But I bet you heard it again.
I finally did, yeah. Luckily, it became a popular song. I like the instrumentals. That was kind of what I enjoyed the most. But so KOMA was important. We also could pick up on the weekend. Saturday morning, we'd all kind of gather around the radio. Maybe you did the same thing. We'd gather around the radio and we'd listen to Cattle Call and Gunsmoke and anyway, all the radio programs. And then we finally got black and white TV later.
Changed your life.
Yeah, kind of. But again, we could only get some of the Idaho stations, so we got Lawrence Welk, and we got Perry Como, and we got, who else? George Coble.
At what point did you decide, you know what, this is something that is just more than a childhood hobby? That it's something that this is going to grow with me.
Yeah, that was a funny day, and there was a specific day. Yeah, there was a specific day. I had my band all through high school, and had such a good time. Playing for all the little places around Du Bois and Pinedale and things. Four
of your friends would just hop around?
Nobody knew how to play, so I had to learn all the instruments. So I would gather, from other professional players that would come through, this and that. And I had a snare drum that I got from Dave Urey, who played in the Sons of the Golden West. And I got, odds and ends. Anyway, and I learned to do a roll, and then I could teach somebody how to be my drummer. And then I learned how to play the bass part so I could teach.
So this is a one-man band, kind of.
Kind of, yeah, it was. And so I would teach my friends how to play, and then they would play their part, and we'd have our songs. But I had to learn all the parts. And we'd start at 8 o'clock. We'd play until midnight. We'd take one 15-minute break, and we did not repeat songs, and we didn't take time between songs. So it was a lot of songs.
Why don't you play for us a little bit, Byron,
Sure.
if you would?
Yeah.
Something that you remember maybe from way back then to start with?
Oh, way back then. Let's see, what would I do for that? Well, this isn't way back, but this one had something that was important to me. This is when I decided I'm going to make it a profession. Remember you asked me about that? The day. We'll get back to it, but this is the one that I used to get into Cal Arts. Chet Atkins, of course, was what I listened to, and I had a bunch of other things that I listened to for my band. But Chet Atkins is what I played for me. So this was kind of his arrangement, and it's what I used to get into Cal Arts.
Very good.
Thanks.
Is that a metaphor for your life yesterday?
Yeah, those are profound words, aren't they? You know originally what that song was going to be?
I don't.
Scrambled eggs.
Really?
He was sitting at the piano going ting, tung, tung, and he's trying to think of some lyrics for it. And he asked his wife, "What's for breakfast, honey?" She said, "Scrambled eggs." He went, "Scrambled eggs." I'm so glad he didn't do that.
I agree. So you went to Cal Arts.
I did.
And that was after a little bit of time at the University of Wyoming.
Yes, I had spent a year at the University of Wyoming. The day that I decided I had spent a year as a psychology major at the University of Wyoming, and there was many reasons, but essentially it was time for the finals. So what did I do to prepare for the finals? I played my guitar for 17 hours straight. And I
have a feeling that wasn't course related.
I thought, I'd always kind of hoped that, I would, the thought was I was always going to do music, but that I would have something to fall back on. Mm-hmm. And at that point I was realizing that I will fail if I try to fall back on something. Mm-hmm. You need to do more if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. And so, yeah, I decided on a particular day that this is what I'll do for a career. But on that day, it's funny, I used to play 5 and 10 hours a day because I wanted to. And also because sheer boredom. You know, it's cold here in the wintertime.
Sure.
Really cold
Need to pass
and
the
dark.
time. Yeah.
And so you can't do too much at night other than play. You know, you don't know much, but you polish what you know really well. So you learn how to polish a thing to a nice, shiny pitch.
Sure.
Anyway, but I enjoyed it less. So I immediately played better, but I enjoyed it less because I said, I'm a professional, therefore I have to play. So that was a little different situation. But I did play technically better immediately because I was more serious about it. Up until then, I was just, this is fun.
Your work's been in movies. You've published. You've created albums. Do you like to compose? Do you like to perform? What grabs you the most? And how have you evolved into what you are now?
Actually, what grabs me the most is getting a song up and running. I love taking a new song, trying to get it to come alive and to polish those little parts. I like problem solving, love problem solving. It doesn't matter what it's in, technical or whether it's in musical. You know, trying to, like when you have something that's really difficult to get to and you go, well, how can I get there? Well, one of the ways you can get there is you look there first and concentrate on that finger. That's a problem solving. I like that kind of thing. It's funny that you can do so much mechanical stuff and make the song come alive. But when you get these things up and running, it's like being on a thoroughbred horse on a bareback and running full bore on a beach somewhere. You know, it's exciting. It's fun to get it going. And so,
there was a time in your life too I want to touch on just briefly. We talked about it a little bit ago,
yeah.
Byron. Technology. You got involved in technology, which someone might think a little bit odd, growing up isolated in Jackson Hole, away from the information age for sure.
And both things, actually. You kind of go, well, how did he get classical guitar if he was raised in Jackson, Wyoming? Because all anybody played was...
Sure.
And so how do you do that? And I didn't know classical music existed until I was 18 years old. You know, as far as I'd heard the Brahms, but classical guitar, I didn't know it existed. And somebody came to town and could play a little bit, not very well, a little bit. And so anyway, that was the first song that I learned, in fact, classical music was.
Really? Yeah.
And so I... how did I get there? So I had heard that from people who came to town. So the only information we really had was when people would travel through. So you'd take your guitar up to the park and you'd play your guitar. And I remember being so disappointed because I'd reached a point, I'd been going to CalArt, so I could play pretty well. And somebody came through and I sat down in the park, you know, to swap licks, you know, let's see what you can play. And I played something and everybody looked at me and one of them said, "Are you a professional?" That wasn't what it was about. Anyway, that was kind of, I felt bad about that.
But you got involved in the computer world
So
at its young age, at its inception. Yeah.
It's an odd thing. My father, you know, was raised on that farm in Gillette, and he was. You have a lot of mechanical devices on your farm that you have to make work. You have to figure out how things work. You have to create a lot of stuff. You have to have a practical chemistry. And it's funny, but it's his problem solving that makes me able to do computers reasonably well. Because, you know, his whole thing was you have to understand the principle, where it's coming from, how it gets there, how
very logically thinking.
Right. And he could do the whole process all the way through. And so he'd been called brilliant by many, many people. And he absolutely was. And so that problem solving helped me. It was easy to transfer it into computers.
Well, you were working then in the computer world in Utah, a company called Novell. Yeah. Were you also playing? Were you doing both, or did you take a hiatus for a little bit?
I was doing both at the same time, yes. It was a strange thing. I had been making my living teaching at colleges and teaching privately, and then doing a few concerts here and there. And that's normally what a guitarist with a degree from, a school does. But I loved technology, and my friend and I both dabbled in computers. So he would always buy a new computer, and when he'd buy a new one, I'd get his old one. So I would dabble with the computer, and that was my hobby. And then he finally got a job in a really good company with Gary Kildall in digital research, one of the cutting-edge technological companies that happened to be based in Monterey, California, where I was living. And he said, come on, there's a job here, and all you have to do is open new software and test it. It's a great job, and you can do it part-time. And I thought, well, anyway, and so I did, and I started at double the salary I was making from teaching and all that. And then within 6 months, it doubled again, and 6 months later, it doubled again. And after 2 years, it doubled again, and I thought, yeah, so I still did a few concerts here and there and a few things like that, but the teaching part fell aside because, I was tired of being poverty-stricken, quite frankly.
There was a time then, though, that you moved back to Jackson Hole and began to focus more on your music?
Right. That whole thing. I have traveled a bunch. I had done a lot, and but every day that I was gone, it's spoiling to be raised here. Every day I was gone, I kept saying, why am I not home? Well, because there's no college to teach at, and there was no technology here. And so how do you go home? You got to have a job. When I got my degree, I came back home, and I've got my degree. I'm going to be a classical guitarist. And I got home, and I had to have a job. So I went and I got a job, yes, at the same gas station for the same amount of money per 2 weeks, wearing a Texaco gas station shirt, pumping gas, and I was going, what's wrong with this picture? I paid a lot of money for that degree. Sure. And so I finally moved out to California and did that. But every day I was gone, I kept saying, why am I not home? While I'm young, this is when I need to walk. I love the walking in the hills here is every bit as much of a passion as this is. I've got
even today.
Even today, especially today, I am absolutely, I have two really strong passions, and one is being out and far away, and the other is being right here.
It's a little surprising to me because Jackson has changed so much from when you were here, when you were very young.
Yeah, everybody asks me about that. They always say, don't you just hate it, because, everything is built up, where there used to be cattle ranches and everything. Actually, no, it's because when I was growing up, everything was shut off at 5 o'clock. The center street light started blinking because there was no activity in town. You couldn't buy fresh fruits and vegetables. Everything was canned. And that's pretty icky stuff. Asparagus and stuff. Oh.
My, how times have changed.
Yeah, so now you can buy things. But there's only 1% of the land that can be inhabited here. So I can still, in 15 minutes, walk up that hill and never see anybody again. I can keep going and never see anyone again. It's still here. That freedom to walk with the animals in the same way that those wild animals are walking, total freedom, it's still here.
But you still get to perform here.
Yeah, now I can play here too.
And so what is your life performing-wise now? What do you do?
It's on my own terms. It's a rare thing. Most musicians have to travel, live out of a suitcase. That's an icky job. You're living in cheap motels, and and how do you get your teeth fixed? How do your medical stuff? I mean, it's a nightmare traveling all the time and trying to, because most musicians make their living traveling from town to town. They're total nomads, and they're living in their van, or they're living, in a cheap motel. Mm-hmm. That's what you do. And I saw these guys, and I looked at them, and I thought, there is no way I'm going to be that old guy with a cheap guitar sitting there playing his hot licks that nobody's listening to, and, depressed and miserable. I'm not going to do this. And so I had a choice with the classical guitar field. I can pursue that one separately. I don't have to tour all the time. So I don't.
So you perform in and around Jackson Hole?
It's pretty hard to get me out of Jackson Hole.
Yeah. Where can we see you? If we're out and about this summer, where are we going to find you?
You're going to find me at Jenny Lake Lodge and at the Center for the Arts. Those two places. I usually do Center for the Arts, which is a nice concert hall. Great sound. They really did a nice job with that when they put that together. And so I'm usually there two or three times a year playing in that concert hall. And then I play usually a concert or two beyond that at various places around here, sometimes a Christmas concert. Dornan's usually has me come out and play an event, so I usually put an event together for that. And that's, like this year I did a Sweethearts concert. So I got all the duo groups around, and I do some duos as well. And so we all came together and did the Sweethearts concert, and then we all got to do an ensemble piece at the end. We had so much fun.
Somebody wants to follow you, Byron. How can they get more information about where you're going to be?
They can call Jenny Lake Lodge, because I'll be playing there all summer.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 nights a week I'll be playing there. And they can get to my website, byronsguitar.com. Yeah.
We'll put that on our screen for our viewers. We've just got about a minute and a half left. Can you take us out with some great music?
Yeah.
We would love for you to do that.
Okay. How about Stepping Out with My Baby, written by somebody who couldn't read music?
Do it. Sounds great. Wonderful. Byron, thank you so much for joining us on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thank you.